Hi, I am Dr. Sai Prasad Reddy. Welcome to the subject software testing. Today we are going to discuss about the topic what is a defect and what is a defect life cycle or bug life cycle. Right? Now, see, the defect is also called as a bug, which is also called as an issue, which is also called as an anomaly. Predominantly in the project, in the software project, software test engineers will use these two words, defect or bug. Right? Defect is also called as a bug. And also we are going to discuss about defect life cycle, which is also called as a bug life cycle. Now, see, what do you mean by the defect? Or what do you mean by bug? There are so many definitions for this defect or bug. We will see. The mismatching between expected results and actual results is called as a defect. Or mismatching between expected output and actual output is called as a defect. Or a manifestation of error in a software is known as a defect or bug. What do you mean by this? A manifestation means demonstration. So, as there is an error in the code that will demonstrate the defect, that demonstrates the fault, that is called as a defect or bug. Or you can define as result of error or mistake in the code is also called as a defect. Or customer dissatisfaction with respect to this project functionalities is also called as a defect. These are the different definitions for the defect or bug. You can use any one. But the first two definitions, that is mismatching between expected results and actual results, and the mismatching between expected output and actual output. These two definitions are very regularly used definitions. If you want to define the defect in a different way, then you can use the rest of three definitions. A manifestation of error in the software is called as a defect. Or a result of error or mistake in the code is called as a defect. Or customer dissatisfaction, any dissatisfaction with respect to this project is also called as a defect. Customer means client dissatisfaction or customer dissatisfaction is also called as a defect or bug. Right? So, next, what do you mean with the software development life cycle? Software defect life cycle or bug life cycle. So, defect life cycle and bug life cycle both are same. Defect is also called as a bug. Right? So, what is the definition of this defect life cycle or bug life cycle? The duration between the detection of a bug and closing the bug successfully is called as a software bug life cycle. What it means? See, when the software test engineer finds the defect, after finding the defect, he will report the defect. After reporting the defect, the concerned software developer will fix the defect. After fixing the defect, the software test engineer will do retesting or confirmation testing, and then he will close the bug. This entire process is called as bug life cycle. Right? Or the different stages between the detection of bug and closing the bug successfully is called as defect life cycle or bug life cycle. Right? See, these two are the definitions for defect life cycle or bug life cycle. You can use any one of these two. Right? So, the different stages which are present between the detection of the bug and closing the bug is called as software bug life cycle. Fine. In this defect life cycle or bug life cycle, who will involve? Software test engineers, test lead, development team and the development lead will involve in this bug life cycle. These four roles will play an important role in bug life cycle. So, in defect life cycle or bug life cycle, software test engineers, software test lead, development team, development lead will involve in this bug life cycle. These four roles will play a vital role in the bug life cycle. Now, see. So now we will discuss about the software defect life cycle or bug life cycle. See, this pictorial diagram represents defect life cycle or bug life cycle. We will discuss about this bug life cycle now. What is the primary role of the software test engineer? As a software test engineer, you have to find the defect. How you will find the defect? By executing the test cases. Right? So, while executing the test cases, if there is a mismatching between expected results and actual results, then it is said to be a defect. Whenever the software test engineer finds the defect first time, that the defect is called new. The status of that particular defect is assigned as new. That means it is a new bug. See, while reporting the defect to the development team, the software test engineers team will follow, the software testing team will follow a format for reporting the defect. In that format, the status of the bug will be assigned as a new. Who is responsible to assign this new status for the defect? Software test engineer. Because he only found the defect. After finding the defect, he is reporting the defect. So whenever the software test engineer finds the bug, immediately the software test engineer will report that the defect to the development team by assigning the status of the bug as a new. Once the software test engineer reports the defect to the development team, immediately the development lead will come into picture. That means the development lead will look into that particular defect which is reported by the software test engineer, and he will assign that defect to the concerned software developer by assigning the status to the defect as assigned. That means, say for example, there is one software developer. He has written coding for that particular functionality. The software test engineer has executed that particular functionality and he found the defect in that particular functionality. Now, who is responsible for that particular defect in that particular functionality? The concerned software developer. Like this, once that defect is reported by the software test engineer, immediately the development lead will look into that particular defect and he will assign that particular defect to the concerned software developer. For what purpose? For fixing that defect, for resolving that defect, for rectifying that defect. So that development lead is responsible to change the defect status from new to assigned. Clear? Once the development lead assigns that defect to the concerned software developer, immediately the concerned software developer will open that defect. Opening the defect is nothing but he will look into that particular defect. That is called open. So the software developer will assign the status as a open to that particular defect. See, these are all the different status. New, assigned, open, fixed, retest, closed, reopened, rejected, deferred, duplicate. These are all different status of the defect in the defect life cycle. Right? See, the concerned software developer will assign the status as open. Right? That means the concerned developer will go through that defect. What is the defect and all? If really there is a defect in this particular functionality, then he will accept that defect for fixing. He will accept that defect for rectifying. Rectifying the defect or fixing the defect or resolving the defect is nothing but fixing, right? So once, how the software developer will fix the defect? By modifying the code. Okay, that is a different story, right? So the concerned developer, once he has fixed the defect, then immediately he will change the status of the defect as a fixed. What it means? He is saying to the concerned software test engineer, "Hey, software test engineer, you have reported the defect, right? So I gone through the defect. The defect is genuine. Then I accepted that defect for rectifying. I have fixed, I have resolved, I have rectified the defect." That is the meaning of assigning the status as a fixed. Who is responsible for assigning the status to the defect as a fixed is software developer only, because he only rectified that defect, he only fixed that defect. After fixing the defect by the concerned software developer, now the concerned software test engineer, that means who has found that defect and who has reported that defect, he only will retest that defect. What is the purpose of retesting? That means the purpose of retesting is he has to test it once again whether that defect is properly fixed or not, whether the defect is completely fixed or not, whether that defect is correctly fixed or not. For this purpose, he has to do verification, right? Verification is retesting. That retesting is also called as verification testing, right? I repeat here, this is very important stage. Once the defect is fixed by the concerned software developer, the concerned software test engineer, who is concerned software test engineer? The test engineer who has found the defect and reported the defect. The concerned software test engineer will do retesting to verify whether the defect is fixed properly or not, whether the defect is properly corrected or not, whether this defect is properly resolved by the developer or not. That is why this is called retesting or verification testing or confirmation testing. Retesting is also called as confirmation testing, right? Once the software test engineer completes this confirmation testing or retesting, if he feels that the defect is fixed properly by the developer, then he will close the defect by assigning the status as a closed to that defect, right? Who is responsible for assigning the status for this defect as a closed is software test engineer. Clear? Right. And now again come back to this retesting. Once that defect is fixed by the concerned software developer, and the concerned software test engineer will do retesting, that is called confirmation testing. In this confirmation testing, if the software test engineer found still there is a defect, that means the defect is not fixed, not resolved, not corrected correctly 100% by the software developer, then he will change the status of the defect as a reopen. What do you mean by the reopen? Again I am opening the defect because the concerned software developer has not resolved the defect properly. Still the defect is present. That is why I am assigning the status of the defect as a reopen. Who is responsible for assigning the reopen status for the defect? Software test engineer. If the status of this defect is assigned as a reopen, means the concerned developer has not fixed the defect properly, has not rectified the defect properly. Again, it will go to open status. If it is reopen, again the concerned software developer will open the defect again, and he will fix the defect. Again fixing and again retesting. If it is again in the confirmation testing, if the software test engineer finds the defect is fixed thoroughly, properly, 100%, then it will change the status as closed to the defect. Right? This is called reopen. Now, see, again come back to open. Once the concerned development lead assigns the defect to the concerned software developer, the concerned software developer will open the defect, assigning the status as open, and now he will go through the defect description. Why this defect has got. If knowingly or unknowingly or by misunderstanding the requirement by the software test engineer, sometimes unknowingly the concerned software test engineer may report the defect. Even though there is no defect, by misunderstanding the functionality or by misunderstanding the requirement, sometimes the software test engineer feels that that is a defect. But actually it is not a defect. So once the concerned software developer opens the defect and he found that there is no defect, then what he will do? He will change the status to the defect as rejected. That means the status of the defect rejected will be assigned by the software developer. Why? Because there is no defect. By misunderstanding the requirement or unknowingly or feeling that there is a defect, the concerned software test engineer has reported the defect. But actually there is no defect. That is why I am rejecting that defect. That is the meaning. Right? Who is responsible for rejected status for the defect? Software developer. And sometimes software test engineer has found the defect and he has reported the defect. And once it is reported the defect, that is assigned by the developer to the concerned software test engineer, he will open the defect as usual and he will go through the defect description and he will go through the defect and he found, yes, there is a defect. He is also accepting and he is also admitting that there is a defect in the software. Then, but that defect is least priority and least severity. That means some defects will be fixed later, not immediately. They will accept that there is a defect. The software developer will accept that there is a defect. But fixing of the defect or rectifying the defect is not immediately done because there is no importance. There is no urgency. They will fix those defects later, after some time, not now. For those type of defects, the concerned software developer will assign the status of the defect as a deferred or hold. Deferred or hold means he is accepting there is a defect, but the defect will not be fixed immediately. There is no urgency. After some time, maybe after 1 week or 10 days or 2 weeks, after 5 days, after 3 days, he will fix the defect. That is called a deferred or hold. Next, duplicate. What it means? See, now, there is, say for example, in software testing team, there are 10 software test engineers. One software test engineer has found the defect and has reported the defect. And next, some other software test engineers who are working in the same project, in the same team, knowingly or unknowingly, he will also report the same defect, which is already reported by some other software test engineer. See, some X software test engineer has found the defect and he has reported the defect. Some Y software test engineer also found the same defect and he also reported the defect. That means the same defect is reported by the multiple number of software test engineers. Right? See, the software test engineer who has reported the defect at the first time, that will be accepted. And the rest of the software test engineers who have reported the same defect again and again unknowingly, for those defects, the concerned software developer will assign the status as a duplicate. That means stating that it is the defect which is already reported by some other software test engineer. You have again reported the defect, the same defect. So we are not considering, we are considering the first reported defect. That is called a duplicate. Clear? So this is the status of the duplicate. So the status of the duplicate will be assigned by the software developer. Right? This is called bug life cycle or defect life cycle. In interview, definitely they will ask you this question. Explain about the defect life cycle or bug life cycle. Clear? So nearly there are 10 status of the defects, different status or different stages. Now, see, what is the definition of this one? Different stages between detection of the bug and closing the bug is called as software bug life cycle. Yes or no? This is the definition of defect life cycle or bug life cycle. So different stages between the detection. So what are the different stages between this one? From new to close. In between the new and the close, there are so many different stages in the software life cycle, bug life cycle. Right? All these status are put together is called a defect life cycle or bug life cycle. Clear? Now, just I will give you the outline. The status new will be assigned by the concerned software test engineer. Assigned is the status that will be assigned by the development lead for the defect. Open, the status open will be assigned by the software developer. Rejected, deferred or duplicate. These three status will be assigned by the concerned software developer. Fixed is the status. Who is responsible for fixed status? Software developer. Retest status will be assigned by the software test engineer. Sometimes the retest will be assigned by the software test lead also, but it's a mutual understanding. That's not an issue. And closed, the status is assigned by the software test engineer. Reopen status will be assigned by the software test engineer for the defect. Right? This is called the defect life cycle and bug life cycle. Now see the different stages of bug in a bug life cycle. Different states of bug in a bug life cycle. New we have discussed. So the for the defect which is detected first time by the software test engineer, the status will be assigned as a new. The software test engineer is responsible to assign the status as new for the defect. Assigned. Once the defect is reported by the software test engineer, the development lead will come into picture and he will assign the status as assigned. And that means the development lead will assign the defect to the concerned developer for fixing. Next, open. The concerned developer changes the status of a bug as open when he starts fixing the bug or rectifying the bug or resolving the bug. Fixed. Once the concerned developer fixes the bug, after completion of the fixing the bug, he will change the status as a fixed. Right? And retest. So once the defect is fixed by the software developer, then the concerned software test engineer will retest that defect. The status will be assigned as a retest by the test lead or sometimes software test engineers also. Right? So for confirmation testing, whether the bug is fixed properly or not. And closed. Once the concerned software test engineer verifies that the bug is fixed properly, then he will change the status as a closed. This is called as a confirmation testing. Retesting is also called as confirmation testing. Reopen. During this retesting, if the concerned software test engineer feels that still there is a defect, the defect is not fixed properly by the concerned developer, then he will change the status of the defect as reopen. Rejected. So that multiple number of the same defect will be if the defect is reported by the software test engineer which is not valid defect, there is no defect at all, there is no genuine defect at all, then he will change the status as rejected. Duplicate. Sometimes knowingly or unknowingly the same defect will be reported by the multiple number of software test engineers. The first software test engineer who has reported that defect will be accepted. For the rest of the software test engineers who have reported the same defect will be assigned the status as a duplicate. Hold or deferred. Once the software test engineer finds the defect, he will report the defect and that defect will be assigned to the concerned software developer, and the concerned software developer will open the defect and he finds that the defect is a least priority and a least severity. That means there is no urgency, no need to fix, no need to rectify that defect immediately. That means he will rectify the defect later stages. He will rectify the defect after some time, not immediately. For those type, because it's not important. Of course, it will be fixed. It will be rectified by the developer, but not immediately. He will rectify after some time. For those type of defects, he will assign the status as a hold or deferred. Right? Yeah. Please subscribe my channel. Share my videos to all students community and for the student groups who are searching for the job in the IT industry. And please like my sessions and don't hesitate to raise your comments in the comment box. Right? Thank you. Thank you very much.